Most people associate the name Homer with the great star of the popular animated series, The Simpsons. And who we have here is a kind of irreverent, maverick, disruptive, rude, lazy, breaker of rules, but somehow he's very engaging and likable even. And in some ways, I think there's a kind of everyman quality in Homer Simpson that is shared by the 45th president. They both would share a kind of antipathy to the elite, to the professional, the managerial, the political elite. They would both have an approximate relationship to the rule of law. They would be alternate characters, and also they share a way of speaking which is saying it as it is, very little regard for popular conventions, being what they'd call politically correct, speaking what's on their mind, often as if there's no censor. You just hear it as it is, and when you've got a figure like that, it's actually has a kind of electrifying quality. You're just hugely engaged. You kind of don't know what you're going to hear next. There's nothing that's predictable.
Do we want old man Patterson here with his finger on the button?
What button? What the hell are you talking about?
What button? Where am I? Who took my false teeth?
A tough business to run for president.
I know, you're a tough guy, Jeb.
And we need to have a leader that is
real
principled.
tough.
You're never going to be president of the United States by insulting your way to the presidency.
Let's see, I'm at 42 and you're at 3, so far I'm doing better.
Doesn't matter.
One of the things that's extraordinary about the 45th president is this amazing combination of sort of strongman and everyman. And one of the things that makes characters interesting is those that resolve contradictions, things that shouldn't fit together. He somehow makes them fit together. And we looked in the last video at that archetypal figure of the cowboy that comes in to do the dirty work. So there's some interesting contradictions.
The reason they're not loving me is I don't want their money. I'm going to do the right thing for the American public. I don't want their money, I don't need their money, and I'm the only one up here that can say that.
There's another much less known figure of Homer, the person who's credited with the two great epics of Western civilization, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and all the 20th century classical scholarship that was looking at these epics and basically say the only way you can understand them is as oral texts and not as written. We receive them as written, and we've had a culture that's more a written culture than an oral culture. Now, when you look at this 20th century scholarship, it's basically pointing out the key characteristics of an oral culture. And there's some very important characteristics of an oral culture. Maybe it's a secondary oral culture because it's oral and visual. And the thing that's so remarkable about the 45th president is he seems to have internalized pretty much all of 20th century classical scholarship. And it's particularly relevant in a culture that now has radio and TV and film and all the electronic media and digital media that are predominantly oral media. So one example, if you read how oral culture works and how oral storytelling works, it has a huge recourse to epithets. One of the reasons for an epithet, by the way, is to help the storyteller. It gives them a little break, because an oral tradition is the telling, so you have to memorize things. So for example, if you read the Odyssey, it's full of epithets like wily Odysseus or the wine-dark sea. And what do we know the 45th president does? He uses epithets all the time. So it's lying Ted or crooked Hillary, and he'd say it over and over again. And there's an important effect in that regard. You begin to understand through the descriptor, which is the epithet, something about the character. And the beauty from a meaning structure point of view is if you've established Hillary as crooked, the opposite of crooked is straight. So the implication, because meanings work through oppositions, there's no meaning without difference. So by establishing crooked Hillary, the implication is it's straight Donald. So it was a sort of assertive intervention using a primary technique of oral storytelling, a very simple one, that established a meaning structure because of the opposition to crooked, which is straight. The second is oral cultures are additive and repetitive because memory is so important. You don't have recourse to the written text, you can't go back. So memory is extremely important. So the constant repetition of phrases or lines has an aggregative, a cumulative effect. So the lock her up and build the wall is a very powerful form of oral storytelling. And that was used very extensively, particularly in the rallies, but any other time he was speaking or interviewed, he would use those additive, repetitive phrases over and over, and obviously with tweeting. A third is that oral storytelling is empathetic and it's participatory, and we spoke about how the rallies made people feel involved, and they particularly tapped into where people were at and left people feeling, through a journey of fear to security, they went out feeling better about themselves, which is an empathetic understanding of where people are at, and it's participatory in that they participated in this journey.
Build the wall. They will.
We spoke the last time about the three primary foundation myths of America that the 45th president used very effectively. The cowboy as rescuer story. We also spoke about Moses, redeeming savior, leading the people to a promised land, and arguably the most important of the American myths, which is poor boy do good or poor girl do good. And that's absolutely at the core of the American dream. But there are two other myths that work with this opposition or agon-based principle of storytelling, which is rot at the top and mob at the gates. Now, rot at the top is an old American story, which is, government, Washington is rotten, and the other type of rot at the top is the financial elite. He made huge use of that, which is demonizing another. It's a sort of aggregated, imagined other that he's put in a group and demonized. The mob at the gates use of opposition is the old invasion story, which goes right back to the cowboy films. That demonizing of some threat used to be the Russians, now it's Islam. And so he used effectively 5 foundational myths of American culture, arguably the most formative foundational myths, and then wound them into a compelling, coherent story that you could play different ways depending on what you wanted to talk about. But it was extremely clear, consistent, and it was basically, you're under threat. That threat is various, and it's deeply felt in the homeland, and what you need is a strong man. Only the strong man can help you. So it was a brilliant red rhetoric narrative structure that the 45th president used.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
Now, what is this to do with marketing, and what is it particularly to do with marketing in the digital age? The answer is pretty clear, because if you look at some commentators on the digital age, it's like they say the consumer wants to participate. You have to listen to the consumer and mold your brand to whatever the consumer wants. I don't think that's true at all. I think you've got to, particularly in an age of participation, be incredibly clear who you are as an archetype and as a personality. And there's no doubt that the 45th president is extremely clear. He's giving them identity and meaning reasons to vote for him. Now, he's stayed extremely consistent to that. By the way, this is not a defense of him, it's just an observation of what he does. And what he does is he scans the media all the time, he watches it all the time, for little nuggets of information that he then tweets about what that means in regard to his foundational story.
The news is not honest, much of the news. It's not honest. And when I have close to 100 million people watching me on Twitter, I have my own form of media.
This, as I said, is not a defense, it's just an observation of what he has done. He intuitively understood the oral world that we now live in. He knew how to work with it to create a narrative that dominates the news, and he has stayed extremely consistent with that. And so that's why I think there's some validity in the epithet Homer Trump.
If you want an experienced public servant, vote for me. But if you want to believe a bunch of crazy promises about garbage men cleaning your gutters and waxing your car, then by all means vote for this sleazy lunatic.